Everyone warned her to stay away. They said the house on the hill swallowed people whole. They said the man who lived there was more beast than human, rich beyond measure, but savage in ways money could never hide. From the outside, his mansion looked like a palace carved from stone and shadows. Its windows were black, its gates always locked, and its walls whispered of secrets too heavy for daylight. Servants rushed in and out like frightened birds, and one by one they never returned. Some left with tears, others with fear etched across their faces, and a few never spoke of what they saw inside. Behind those walls lived the billionaire everyone feared. People whispered of his cruelty. He fired staff in the middle of storms. He broke contracts like they were paper scraps. He shouted until the walls shook, and when his anger rose, even the bravest men lowered their eyes. To the world, he was untouchable. To those who worked for him, he was merciless. And yet, to a young woman standing at the gates, none of that mattered. She was too tired of life's weight pressing down on her. Her shoes were worn, her clothes thin, her hands trembling not from fear, but from hunger. Behind her lay a trail of unpaid bills, a sick mother who needed care, and a future that seemed to be slipping away before it even began. Every door had been slammed in her face, until this one opened. The job no one wanted was the only job she could take. When the contract was pushed toward her, its letters bold and unforgiving, her heart hammered. They told her stories of staff who fled before dawn. They warned her of the man whose eyes were colder than steel, but desperation has a way of silencing warnings. With a single stroke of her pen, she wrote her name across the page. The air seemed to shift. The ink looked darker than black. Somewhere inside the house, a door creaked as if it had been waiting for her. The job was cursed. Everyone knew it, but she had chosen it anyway. And from that moment on, nothing in her life would ever be the same. Stories like this are warnings. If you don't subscribe, the next warning might come too late. Maybe when it's your family, your child, or your home. If you still refuse, then tell us why in the comments. But remember, silence is the same mistake that doomed them. The mansion rose from the earth like a monster carved from stone. Its black windows reflected nothing, not even the pale sky. Ivy crawled across its walls as though trying to strangle the life out of it, but the house stood firm, daring anything or anyone to try to tame it. To those who looked from a distance, it was beautiful. To those who stood at its gates, it was terrifying. The iron gates creaked open, not because they welcomed her, but because she had been summoned. She stepped inside with hesitant feet, carrying a small bag pressed tight against her chest. Every part of her body felt heavy, her legs from exhaustion, her heart from fear, her soul from the weight of debts and disappointments that had followed her like shadows for years. Rumors about this place filled the town. They said no servant lasted longer than a week. Some left in tears. Others vanished without a trace. But she was not like the others. She had no room for choices. Her mother lay in a small apartment bed, her lungs fighting every breath. The doctor's bills piled higher than her paychecks. Her father was long gone, leaving nothing behind but unpaid debts and broken promises. The job she begged for in town had turned her away with pity in their eyes. She was too plain, too poor, too desperate. But desperation, she knew, could make the plainest woman the bravest one alive. And so she stood before the house that terrified the world. A butler met her at the door. His face was blank, drained of warmth. His voice carried no welcome, only command. He led her down a long hall where chandeliers dripped crystal tears but gave off no light. The air smelled of polished wood and something older, something bitter, as if grief itself had soaked into the walls. The butler whispered as they walked. "There are rules in this house. Learn them, break them, and you won't last the night." Her throat tightened. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his expression silenced her. When the double doors at the end of the hall opened, she saw him, the man everyone called Savage. He was seated by the fire, though he did not look warmed by it. The flames licked and danced, but his eyes were cold steel. He did not rise when she entered. He did not smile. He simply stared at her as if she were another object delivered to his home, like a chair or a broken clock. Her chest ached under his gaze. She had prepared for cruelty, but the weight of his silence pressed against her more than shouting ever could. He finally spoke, his voice low, sharp, and tired of the world. "You are late." Her lips parted, but no words came. She lowered her eyes, clutching her bag tighter. "You will work. You will follow the rules. You will not ask questions." His tone cut through the air, each word like a blade. "If you cannot do that, leave now. The door is still open." The butler shifted beside her, as if he expected her to turn and run. But she did not. Behind her was hunger, debt, and despair. Ahead of her was cruelty, but also survival. "I will stay," she whispered, though her voice shook. For the first time, his eyes flickered. Not with kindness, not with anger, but something unreadable, something buried so deep even he seemed afraid of it. He turned away. "The room at the top of the east stairs is yours. Stay out of the west wing. That part of the house is not for you." Not for you. The words clung to her skin like frost. She bowed her head and followed the butler up the wide staircase. Each step groaned beneath her feet, as if the house itself disapproved of her presence. She could feel the weight of portraits staring down from the walls, men and women with eyes painted too vividly, as if they carried secrets even in oil and canvas. The east wing smelled faintly of roses, long dead but not forgotten. Her room was plain, with white sheets and heavy curtains. It was more than she had ever owned, yet it felt like a cage. The butler left without a word, closing the door softly behind him. She sat on the bed, her heart racing. She had made it inside. She had survived the first meeting, but something about the billionaire's eyes lingered in her mind. They were cruel, yes, cold, yes. But beneath that iron mask was something else, something broken. Night fell heavy and fast over the mansion. Shadows stretched like claws across the floor. The silence was unnatural, pressing into her ears until even her own breath sounded too loud. She lay in bed with her eyes open, waiting for sleep that would not come. Then she heard it, soft at first, almost a trick of her imagination, a sound so out of place in this house of silence that she held her breath just to hear it better. Music. A piano. The notes were slow, sorrowful, dripping with grief. They filled the air like ghosts, moving through the walls, calling to her from somewhere deep inside the mansion. Her body froze. She remembered his words, "Stay out of the west wing." And yet the music came from there. Her pulse quickened, each note pulling her from the safety of her bed. She rose, her bare feet touching the cold wooden floor. The house creaked around her as though warning her to stop, but she walked anyway. Down the hall, past the portraits whose painted eyes seemed to follow her. Past the staircase that led back to the firelit room where he might still be sitting in silence. The music grew clearer, more haunting. It was not the music of a savage man. It was the music of sorrow, the music of a heart that had loved and lost. She stopped before the locked doors of the west wing. Her hand hovered over the handle. The keys were gone, the locks firm, but the music bled through the cracks as if begging her to listen. Her heart pounded so loudly she thought it might betray her. She pressed her ear against the door. The melody climbed higher, then broke into silence as sudden as death. She stumbled back, gasping. The hallway was empty. The shadows stretched longer. And behind that door, where no one was supposed to go, silence screamed louder than any sound. She ran back to her room, closing the door tight, her chest rising and falling in terror. She had taken the job no one wanted. She had met the savage billionaire face to face. She had promised to follow the rules. But now, on her very first night, the house had whispered to her, and she knew with cold certainty that this place was not simply a mansion. It was a cage of secrets, and she had just stepped into its heart. You've seen how one choice can change everything. If you don't subscribe right now, you may forget this story, and the next time life tests you, you'll fail the same way they did. If you won't join us, at least explain in the comments, because staying quiet means you accept their fate as your own. Days slipped by in silence. The mansion seemed alive, its walls breathing, its floors groaning with secrets. The rules of the house revealed themselves one by one, like chains tightening around her wrists. Meals were taken alone. No one sat with him at the great dining table. Plates appeared and disappeared in ritual silence. Even the butler spoke of it as law. No one disturbed him at his meals. The West Wing remained locked, its doors always shut tight. The staff whispered about it, their voices trembling like leaves in the wind. Some said that Wing was cursed. Others claimed he locked away more than furniture there. And worst of all, the past was forbidden. No questions, no curiosity, no mentions of what came before. The house did not allow it, and neither did its master. At first, she thought she could manage these rules. She had agreed to them, after all. But as days turned to weeks, her curiosity grew like a fire smothered beneath ash. She noticed things the others ignored. Sometimes, in the quietest hours, she heard footsteps where no one should walk. Sometimes she found doors ajar that were always meant to be locked. And sometimes, when the master of the house believed himself alone, she saw tiny cracks in the armor of cruelty he wore so carefully. One morning, through the kitchen window, she saw him stop in the rain to rescue a small dog trembling by the gates. His hands, known for throwing fury, lifted the animal as if it were glass. His eyes, cold as iron in front of others, softened for a fleeting moment before he turned and vanished again into shadow. Another night, she discovered a medicine bottle left on her table. It was the same one prescribed for her mother, though she had never told him about it. Someone in the house had carried it there, silent and unseen, and she knew it could only have been him. But why? Why would a man known for cruelty act with such hidden kindness? Why did he protect his heart so fiercely if it was still capable of compassion? The staff offered no comfort. In hushed tones, they spoke of ruined lives, business partners bankrupted, servants dismissed without warning, neighbors who dared to cross him and vanished from sight. They painted him as a monster. And yet, she had seen something else, something fragile, something broken. But dear listener, ask yourself this. Have you ever judged someone only by what the world said about them? Have you ever believed whispers instead of searching for truth? If you are listening to this story and have ever walked away from someone without knowing their real pain, do not be silent. Comment your truth below, because silence is what buries people alive. The days deepened. The mansion pressed heavier on her shoulders. Shadows clung to her at night, and secrets brushed against her skin like cold fingertips. Then, one stormy evening, she found herself drawn into a forgotten corner of the library. Dust swirled in the air, and the scent of old paper wrapped around her. A broken drawer jutted from a desk, half hidden beneath books. Inside it lay a single photograph. The edges were frayed, the colors had faded. But what made her blood run cold was the violence carved into its surface. Two faces, one of a woman, the other of a child, had been scratched away, burned until only black scars remained. Her hands shook as she held it. The man in the picture was him. Not the savage billionaire she knew now, but a younger man with softer eyes, standing between the two faceless figures as if they were his whole world. Something had destroyed this family. something so dark that even memory had been burned from existence. She clutched the photograph to her chest, her heart thundering. She had taken the job no one wanted. She had seen shadows, heard music, witnessed cruelty and kindness. But this broken picture, was the first crack in the walls he had built around himself. And now she knew the savage billionaire was hiding more than secrets. He was hiding a tragedy that could ruin them both. Morning light sat thin and gray over the mansion, like a veil that could not decide whether to lift or fall. The days had begun to fold into one another, stitched together by rules, silence, and the soft weight of secrets that never slept. She moved through the halls with quiet steps and steady hands, learning every corner, every creak, every shadow that hid behind heavy curtains. She thought she understood the rhythm of the house. She was wrong. He began to test her. It happened in small ways at first, extra tasks placed without warning, fragile objects left where a clumsy hand could shatter them, schedules that changed by the hour, sometimes by the minute. The work felt like a set of riddles, each with its own trap. She felt watched, measured, weighed. Some days he ignored her completely, passing close enough to chill her skin and yet far enough to make her feel invisible. Other days he sent for her in a way that made the butler's eyes flicker with something like pity, and then he stood before her with his walls up, colder than the marble floors, asking nothing and somehow asking everything. Harsh one moment, protective the next. She struggled to keep her balance on that edge. One afternoon, as rain pressed its palm against the windows, she found fresh flowers left in a vase in her room. No note, no message. Only color in a place that did not like color. She knew who had placed them there, because no one else would dare. That same evening, he made the kitchen change the entire dinner service, then sent the meal back untouched, as if the world itself could never please him. She learned to stop expecting kindness, and also to stop fearing cruelty. In this house, both lived together, sharing the same face. The staff watched her with a strange mix of interest and fear. Some treated her like a guest who did not understand the rules of the storm she had walked into. Others looked at her the way one looks at a clock that has begun to tick too loudly, curious, uneasy, waiting for something to break. The housekeeper, older than dust and steady as stone, left a folded sheet on the end of the heroine's bed. Inside it lay a single line written in a careful hand. It said that no one who stayed close to him kept their peace for long. It said that this was not a warning, but a plea. It said that the West Wing was a grave without a name. The words were simple. The meaning was heavy. She placed the note back between the folds and tucked it deep in a drawer she never opened again. But the drawer hummed inside her, like a bee trapped under glass. The mansion created subplots the way a storm creates waves. A woman arrived one bright morning in a car that looked like a blade. Her heels clicked through the foyer, and her smile had the shine of a knife that loved its work. She did not belong to the house. She belonged to him. Not now, but once. She walked through the rooms with a memory that held power. Staff moved aside. Doors opened before she reached them. She did not look at the heroine as a person. She looked at her as an obstacle that did not know it was in the way. The woman's perfume lingered for hours after she left. The scent felt like expensive smoke that could make your eyes water without ever seeing a flame. It whispered of shared pasts and unfinished business. It whispered that history can knock on a door and enter without being invited. It whispered that the house did not only belong to shadows, it belonged to those who knew how to use them. A different threat came in the shape of a letter from the world outside. It arrived folded and official, the kind of paper that likes to tighten throats. It held numbers that did not care about hearts, past due notices, hospital charges, rent that had grown teeth while she was gone. The paper used words that loved to hurt: final, urgent, immediate, the kind of words that make sleep thin and food tasteless. She held the letter until her hands shook, then hid it beneath the lining of her small bag, as if cloth could soften the blow. The mansion did not care about late fees. It did not care about her struggles beyond its gates. But the walls heard her breathing change. The floors felt her steps grow heavier. Even the curtains seemed to draw a little closer, like hands trying to cover a shiver. At dawn one day, the gardeners discovered a stray cat hiding beneath the hedge. It hissed at anyone who approached, all bones and fear and anger. By evening, it was gone. By nightfall, she found a small saucer set near the back stairs, filled with milk that had just begun to cool. She did not place it there. She did not need to ask who did. Some men hide their kindness the way they hide their pain, deep, private, and furious when found. Rumors grew like vines. Staff from old years returned for a day, moving like ghosts who had forgotten how to haunt. They spoke little. They left fast. The driver who had known him longest said with a voice that shook that loyalty had limits when it stood too close to storms. A gardener with hands cut by thorns said that the earth behind the west wing never seemed to rest. Soil turned itself over. Roots twisted wrong. Even grass refused to grow straight in that corner. Then came the rumor that did not die when the sun rose, the rumor that returned even after the doors were locked and the candles put out. It said he had hurt someone once, not with contracts, not with money, with finality. It said there had been a night years ago when anger met fear and did not stop. No one said it directly, no one wrote it down. They let the hint hang in rooms like smoke that could not find a window. She heard it, and it entered her blood like cold. The house began to challenge her in other ways. The locks on the west wing did not change, but the shadows near them seemed to. Some nights the door looked a little open when it had been closed. Some mornings the doorknob felt warm, as if someone had just held it for a very long time. Once, she found a single black thread caught in the hinge, thin as a hair, left behind like a signature no one meant to sign. Temptation grew patient. It did not rush. It waited for the right night. That night arrived with the sound of voices downstairs, the kind of voices that carry money and sharpen its edges on people. He hosted a gathering for cold friends and hot enemies who disguised themselves as one another. The rooms filled with tuxedos and gowns, with smiles that showed teeth, with gloved hands that shook other gloved hands, and eyes that read faces like balance sheets. She moved through the event like a shadow that had learned to carry trays. She did not draw attention, but attention found her anyway, in sideways glances and whispers that sounded like fabric tearing. At the center of it all stood the master of the house, tall and still, as if the air itself respected his borders. Sharp one moment, softer the next. He watched the room the way a captain watches a sea he does not trust. Some guests admired him with the awe people give to a storm they cannot command. Others feared him with the fear they save for cliffs they cannot climb. The woman with the knife smile returned in a dress that fit her like a secret. She walked as if she owned the floor. She greeted him as if she owned his time. History made the air between them tight and hot. Her eyes slid toward the heroine, then away, as if flicking ash from a cuff. A business partner stood not far behind, a man whose laughter sounded like paper being cut. He carried confidence like a weapon and looked around as if choosing what to wound. A small accident broke the surface of the night. A tray slipped from unsteady hands that were not hers. A glass fell. A drop of red stained the pale fabric of the master's cuff. The crowd stirred, eager to see how a man like him handled mess. He lifted his hand, and silence fell like a curtain. He said nothing. He did nothing. But some faces already began to form certain stories. Dangerous stories. Stories people enjoy when they do not have to face the person they are about to burn. The business partner's smile sharpened. The ex's eyes brightened. The heroine felt the weight of the room tilt toward cruelty and decided not to let it fall. She stepped forward with the calm of someone who had survived harder nights than a rich person's anger. She acted with the kind of care that turns shame into grace. She covered the stain, fixed the mess, and directed the attention away from his cuff with a quiet skill that made it look as if perfection had never been broken. She steadied the other servant, steady enough that pity did not have to enter the room and eat anyone alive. The effect was small but real. The room exhaled. Judgment loosened its grip. The business partner's laugh died in his throat. The ex's smile lost one of its blades. For a brief second, the house remembered that kindness could move faster than gossip. Across the room, his eyes found her. For the first time since she had entered his life, his gaze did not feel like ice. It felt like a question he had not let himself ask in years. He did not thank her. He did not nod. But something quiet shifted between them, like a lock hearing the right key somewhere far away. The evening ended. The guests left in cars that purred like tigers that had been fed. The woman with the knife smile pressed a hand against the doorway before she stepped out, leaving behind the faint mark of someone who expected to return. The business partner whispered to the air, making promises to himself that did not include mercy. The house fell into silence again, but it was not the old silence. It was a heavier one, shaped by eyes that had seen more than was safe. She returned to her room and found another envelope behind her door, thin and white. Inside lay another bill from the outside world, this one uglier than the last. It threatened more than money. It threatened the small life she had left behind, the one that waited for her on a low bed in a small apartment. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and let the tears come. Not loud, not long, but real. She pressed her palm to the wood and tried to borrow strength from the house, even though she did not trust it. Then she wiped her face and stood up again, because standing was the only thing that had ever worked. The next day, the tests returned with new teeth. He changed the order of entire rooms and expected them to be remade by noon. He sent the butler with tasks that felt like puzzles wrapped in traps. He placed a crystal figurine at the top of the west staircase, thin as a drawn breath, poised where a careless elbow could end it. She moved like a dancer through danger and did not break anything, not even herself. That evening, the ex returned without announcing herself and left without a goodbye. Later that night, the business partner called the front line and made questions sound like compliments. The staff said nothing, but their silence turned the air grainy. The rumors continued to scratch under the doors. Someone repeated the story that he had once been involved in a night that ended in a death, a car, a cliff, a storm. The details changed with every mouth that told it, but the shape stayed the same. He had been there, so had someone who never came back. True or not, the story liked itself too much to leave. She held the burned photograph from the library in her mind, the way one holds a hot coin, carefully, always aware of the heat. She kept seeing the young man with softer eyes standing between the faceless woman and the faceless child, and she felt the wrongness of those burned-out faces every time she closed her own eyes. The West Wing pulled at her like a tide. She did not go at first. She respected the lock the way one respects the edge of a roof. But temptations that arrive every night stop being visitors and become roommates. She found herself counting the steps from her door to the forbidden corridor. She found herself listening for the music again, that sorrowful piano that had crawled through the cracks on her first night. Sometimes she thought she heard it. Sometimes she thought she only wanted to. One midnight, when the moon wore a thin smile and the wind curled around the corners of the house, she rose from her bed and moved into the hallway. The floor was cold. The air tasted metallic, like a secret kept too long. She walked past sleeping doors and quiet paintings. Her breath made tiny clouds that disappeared before she did. The west wing waited the way a held breath waits. The knob was colder than the floor. The lock told her no with its mouth shut. She lowered her ear to the door and listened for the music. Silence at first. Then something else. Not notes, not chords, breathing, soft, unsteady, human. Her heart climbed into her throat. She did not turn the knob again. She did not knock. She let the sound mark her and then carried it away like a stolen gem as she returned to her room. She lay awake till dawn, holding a new fear that did not feel like fear at all. It felt like a truth trying to be born. The next days moved as if the house had sensed her near the locked door and wanted to distract her with daylight. The ex arrived again, this time with a cold gift and a warm lie. The business partner sent a proposal that looked generous and smelled wrong. The driver warned the kitchen that people with more money than conscience were circling like gulls above a ship in trouble. He remained unreadable but not absent. He watched everything. He watched her. Sometimes his harshness grew sharp enough to leave small cuts in the day. Sometimes his protectiveness stood between her and some unseen wind. Once, she found herself walking across the front steps while a photographer hid near the hedges. Camera pointed like a rifle. He stepped from the doorway with a movement so quick it cut the moment in half, and the lens dropped. The photographer vanished into the street, like a ghost afraid of daylight. He said nothing to her. He returned inside without looking back. She stood on the steps with her heart pounding and understood that monsters also keep other monsters away. The money knife ex returned again, but this time the house did not open so easily for her. The staff became slow at doors. The butler's face turned to polite stone. She left faster than she planned, frustration making her perfume taste bitter. On her way out, she brushed past the heroine with a glance that promised a future visit with less patience. The business partner sent an invitation with gold letters and a pressure that felt like hands on one's shoulders. A charity event, a public stage, a room eager for show. He wanted the master of the house present because the city liked to watch kings sit on chairs too small for them. The event meant cameras. The event meant eyes. The event meant danger. He went. The house held its breath. She went too, because her work asked it and because the night carried a promise of balance shifting in some direction that might favor survival. The ballroom was a glass box filled with light and hunger. Wealth hung from the ceiling like fruit that only certain hands could reach. He moved through it like someone who had been taught to swim in cold water. The business partner welcomed him with a smile that pretended not to bite. The ex floated in, perfect and precise, her attention a narrow beam she pointed where she wished to burn. People spoke in a code made of compliments and measurements. Then came the moment when the room decided to test his edges before a crowd. A question with a hook. A comment with a stone inside it. A history dressed up as a joke that was not a joke. A reporter asked a question whose answer was designed to cut no matter which direction it fell. The rumor about the long-ago night tried to become a fact under chandeliers. The air sharpened. The business partner watched with the joy of a fisherman who sees a line grow tight. The ex held still the way a person does when they hope to hear a small crack that means something big has broken. The heroine moved before fear could choose her actions. She made a small choice that changed the shape of the moment. She stepped into the frame at the exact right second, the way a hand steps between a face and a blow. She turned the attention with the kind of care that looks like magic from afar and like work up close. She managed timing, distance, and light the way one manages a fire that threatens to jump a line. The question lost its teeth. The room swallowed its own laughter. The danger did not leave, but it moved a step back. He did not praise her. He did not soften. But his eyes found her across that bright, cold room, and for one heartbeat the world felt less tilted. They returned to the house late. The sky wore the color of metal about to break. The staff had prepared quiet. The halls were dim. She carried the heat of the night in her skin and could not place it anywhere safe. She passed the east stairs, then the landing, then the corner where the air changes its mind and becomes the west wing. The door waited like a held breath again. The lock gleamed without light. She did not plan to stop. She stopped anyway. A sound came through the wood, not music, not breathing, a soft, small cough. Her body went very still while her heart did not. She took one step closer, then another. The cough returned, followed by the kind of flurry that doors should not carry. The quick patter of steps too light to belong to an adult. Then a whispering hush of blankets. Then silence, as if the house itself put a finger to its lips. She staggered back, steadying herself on the wall. The truth that had been pacing behind her finally ran past and stood in front where she could see it. He was not keeping furniture in the West Wing. He was not keeping ghosts. He was keeping life. The next morning brought work that did not care about what she had learned in the dark, but the knowledge did not let go. It shaped her movements. It guided her eyes. It made patterns in the day where before there had been only tasks. She noticed how certain meals disappeared without ever crossing the dining room. She noticed how a light near the far corner of the west corridor burned low but steady at hours when no one should be awake. She noticed how a small window high on an outside wall had smudges where tiny hands might rest. Pieces moved into place like chess played by someone who never loses. She did not look at him differently, but her heart did. Harsh, protective, cold, kind, cruel, tender. None of the words had been strong enough to hold the whole picture. None of the stories had told the deepest truth. He was hiding his child. She did not know whose child. She did not know why. She did not know what danger had carved this choice into his life, or what love had kept it in place all these years. She only knew that this house built from stone, money, and fear had a living heart curled in its locked wing, a small flame he would guard with teeth and nails if he had to. The realization did not make the mansion less frightening. It made it more. Because love can be ruthless when it is protecting something small. Because truth can turn every shadow into a test. Her mind ran through every rumor she had heard, and many dissolved under this new light. Others grew sharper and crueler. If he had hidden a child, what had he been forced to do to keep that child safe? If a night long ago had ended with tragedy, had it been the work of a monster, or the howl of a father tearing the world with his bare hands to save what was his? She thought of the burned faces in the photograph. A woman, a child, gone from the picture not because they never existed, but because someone wanted to erase the past without erasing the love. Fire had tried to make absence, but the shape of the missing remained. Love leaves outlines even when the faces are gone. She moved through the day, quiet as snowfall, carrying a secret that had not been given to her and yet could not be dropped. The house watched her. The staff watched her. He watched her most of all, in those brief, unsmiling glances that weighed and measured. She let her eyes tell nothing. She let her hands tell everything they needed to: steadiness, care, loyalty that did not sell itself. As night came down, the piano returned, soft and slow, like someone teaching a lullaby to darkness. The melody drifted from the forbidden corridor and rested on the air like dust that glows only when light finds it. She stood in her doorway and listened. The notes climbed and fell with the rhythm of small breathing. The song ended in a hush that sounded like sleep. A wind moved across the roof. The house settled. The lock on the west wing stayed shut. But nothing in the mansion was the same. The first cracks had deepened into a fault line. And behind that door, in the heart of a place the world called savage, a child slept. The mansion had already tested her courage, but nothing prepared her for what came next. The house itself seemed to sense the weight of the secret she now carried. It pressed harder, watched closer, whispered louder through its long corridors. Every corner, every portrait, every stair seemed to ask the same question. What will you do with what you know? She faced the choice alone each night in her small East Wing room. She could stay loyal, keep her silence, protect what she had seen. Or she could step outside those gates, tell the world the truth, and free herself from the grip of a man who ruled through fear. But freedom had a price. If she spoke, she would not only expose him, she would also put the child at risk. And something deep inside her would not allow her to do that. The storm broke when she discovered the darkest shadow of his past. Long ago, his name had been dragged through the fire of headlines. The world said he had harmed his wife, the only woman who ever softened his iron edges. Reporters filled pages with half-truths and sharp lies, feeding on grief like vultures. They said he was guilty of rage, guilty of violence, guilty of the worst sin a husband could carry. When his wife died, no jury convicted him, but the trial in the court of public opinion never ended. The media painted him savage, and the world agreed. The child hidden in the West Wing was not only his last tie to love, it was also his greatest vulnerability. The scandal had scarred the family so deeply that he locked away what was left of it, choosing secrecy over another public execution. She pieced this truth together from scraps. The hushed voices of staff who had been around long enough to remember, the scraps of paper left in old drawers, the way his eyes darkened whenever the subject of family brushed too close. Each clue bled into the next, until the picture was undeniable. One evening, curiosity overcame fear. She could not stop herself. The photograph with burned faces haunted her, pulling her steps toward the West Wing again. This time, she meant to open it, meant to see the truth with her own eyes. But she never reached the lock. He found her. The air in the corridor turned sharp as he appeared from the shadows, his presence cutting through the dim light like steel drawn from a sheath. His eyes burned with the fury of a man betrayed, though she had not yet betrayed him. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, but it carried enough force to make her blood turn cold. Her lips parted, but no words came. He stepped closer. His hand closed around her wrist, not cruel, but strong enough to remind her of his power. For a moment she thought he might truly throw her out, end everything, send her back to debts, to hunger, to despair. Her heart broke in the silence between them. And then, against her will, the truth fell from her like broken glass. She told him why she had come. The mother who coughed through nights with lungs too weak to fight. The stack of bills that mocked her dreams. The jobs that would not have her. The doors that never opened. The shame of poverty eating her life piece by piece. She told him the house was not the only cage she lived in. Her entire world outside had been built of bars. When her voice finally failed, she waited for his verdict. The fire in his eyes shifted. It did not soften into kindness. It did not melt into pity. But it changed. For the first time, he looked at her as if she were more than a servant, as if he saw himself in her, a reflection of struggle hidden beneath scars. He released her wrist, and the silence between them grew heavy with things neither could say. He turned away, but not before she saw the shadow of something human flicker in his gaze. She thought that was the end. She thought the storm had passed, but storms rarely end when you want them to. The following day, the threat arrived. It came not from within the house, but from the world outside, a rival with teeth sharper than gossip and claws longer than rumors. Another billionaire, a man who thrived on tearing apart enemies, had found his weak spot. Not the mansion, not the fortune, not even the scandal of the past. He had found her, her family. The rival's message was clear. Protect him, and you will pay. Stay close to him, and those you love will suffer. She had walked into the savage billionaire's house to save her life. Now her very presence there had painted a target on her mother's door. The choice she had been running from came crashing down upon her. Remain in the shadows of this mansion, holding a secret that could destroy them both, or walk away and watch her family bleed for sins that were not hers. The breaking point had come, and when she looked into the dark windows of the house that night, she knew the next step she took would change everything. This story isn't entertainment, it's education written in blood and tears. If you don't subscribe, you're saying you don't want to be ready when life throws shadows at you. If you dare not subscribe, then step into the comments and confess why. Because ignorance has no excuse. The house had grown heavier since the threat arrived. The air itself seemed to close around her throat, pressing until even breathing felt like disobedience. Every glance through a window carried the shape of unseen eyes. Every step down a corridor felt stalked. She had thought the mansion was her cage. Now she understood. It was her shield, too. And shields could break. The truth did not come gently. It rarely does. One night he found her by the fire, her hands folded tight against her knees, her face pale with worry. He stood in silence so long she thought he would turn away. But the silence broke, and his voice came rough, scraped against memory. He told her everything. Years ago, there had been a night of screams and smoke. His wife, the only woman who had ever walked past his walls, had been caught in a storm of scandal not of her making. Lies turned to headlines. Headlines turned to judgment. A cruel business enemy, one he could not yet name, had sharpened the world against them both. His wife died in a fire that was ruled an accident, but whispered as murder. He had been accused, tried by eyes, cursed by mouths. And though the law never bound him, the public never forgave him. The only thing left was their child. To protect that fragile life, he sealed the West Wing, erased photographs, burned memories, and locked away what the world would destroy if it could. His cruelty was not born from hatred. It was armor forged from grief. The savage billionaire was not savage at all. He was broken. Her heart tore in two as he spoke. She wanted to hate him for hiding such a truth, for dragging her into a web of shadows. But she could not. For the first time, she saw the man not as the world painted him, but as he truly was, a father drowning in love and guilt, a man who wore cruelty as a mask to keep his last treasure alive. In the days that followed, she saw the child. Not clearly, not openly, but enough. A soft laugh slipping through the cracks of the forbidden wing. A small hand pressed against glass, leaving a fleeting print like a promise. A toy left near the steps, forgotten in haste. And then, the moment that sealed her place in the house forever, the child reached for her, eyes wide, innocent, seeing in her something familiar, something safe. Her chest broke open. For the first time in years, she felt wanted, not as a servant, not as a pawn, but as a mother. But love rarely comes without claws. The rival moved faster now. He spun lies in courtrooms and boardrooms, painted crimes on the walls of the mansion that had never happened. He whispered to the press that the savage billionaire had returned to his old ways, this time with fresh victims. Reporters swarmed, cameras circled, friends vanished. The world was eager for another chance to crucify him. Suspense tightened like a rope. He grew harsher, colder, snapping at the smallest mistakes. Not because she had failed him, but because the walls were closing, and he did not know if he could hold them back again. She bore it in silence, understanding now that anger was his only shield. And then, one evening, as storms clawed across the sky, the walls finally cracked. It was not in rage, it was not in cruelty. It was in something gentler, something raw. They stood alone in the library, the firelight flickering against the shelves. The storm roared outside, but inside it was quiet. So quiet it felt unreal. His mask slipped. His voice broke. He told her she was different, not because she obeyed, not because she endured, but because she saw him, truly saw him, when the world only saw a monster. Her hand brushed against his. The touch was simple, but it burned like a secret. For a heartbeat, the mansion itself seemed to stop breathing, and in that silence, closeness bloomed. Fragile, dangerous, undeniable. But love is never free. The rival struck deeper than ever before. Papers surfaced with accusations so sharp they could cut futures to ribbons. Bank accounts froze, guards vanished, even allies looked away. The mansion trembled under the weight of betrayal, and at the center of it all came the final twist, the one that nearly shattered her. The rival was not a stranger. He was a shadow from her past, an ex-lover who had left her broken, or a debt collector who had stolen her father's last breath, or a family enemy whose greed had once left her homeless. The face she thought buried now rose again, grinning with power. He had found her, and through her, he had found the billionaire's weakness. The two men were tied together, not only by wealth and war, but by her blood, her pain, her past. The mansion shook with the truth. Her knees threatened to give way. She thought she had escaped that part of her life, but it had followed her here, dressed in wealth and vengeance. The rival offered her a choice, cruel and clear. Betray the man who had sheltered her, betray the child who had reached for her hand, or lose everything she loved outside these gates, her mother, her last family, her fragile world beyond these stone walls. The message arrived sharp as a knife, delivered in a letter that smelled of smoke and memory. That night, the mansion fell into silence deeper than ever before. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her chest heavy with dread. She had stepped into this house to save herself. She had stayed to protect a secret. She had begun to love what she was never meant to touch. And now, at the breaking of the hour, she was caught in the cruelest trap of all. At the edge of midnight, the door to her room creaked open. Rough hands dragged her from her bed, muffling her cry before it reached the air. A hood was pulled over her head, and the last thing she heard before darkness swallowed her was a voice she knew too well. The rival had come for her, and he would not let go until she chose between betrayal and blood. The night of her capture smelled of damp rope and gasoline. The rival's men dragged her into a warehouse at the edge of the city, a place where windows were broken and the wind howled through steel beams like wolves. The rival stood waiting, his smile sharp enough to slice through the dark. He thought he had won. The demand was cruelly simple: betray the man who had sheltered her, betray the child she had grown to love, or watch her mother's fragile life end under the weight of his revenge. He thought fear would make her boo. He had forgotten that desperation makes some people unbreakable. When dawn bled into the world, the mansion gates opened wide. The billionaire arrived, not with lawyers or guards, but with fire in his eyes. For years, the world had called him savage. That morning, he carried the weight of the word with pride, not as cruelty, but as armor for the ones he loved. The rival sneered, expecting weakness. What he met instead was fury born of protection, sharpened by grief, and fueled by love. The confrontation cracked the air like thunder. Secrets long buried clawed their way into the open. The truth spilled. The billionaire had never murdered his wife, never harmed his family. He had hidden his child not to erase them, but to protect them from enemies who thrived on destruction. His so-called ruthlessness had always been a shield, one he carried alone while the world spat at his name. And in that moment when lies burned away, she saw him for what he truly was, not savage, not cruel, but a man who had bled in silence for too long. The fight was brutal, not with fists alone, but with truths hurled like blades. She risked her life, breaking free of her captors, placing herself between danger and the child who had become her heart. The rival had come for blood. What he met was courage. By the time the police stormed in, drawn by evidence she had secretly passed along, the story had already rewritten itself. Reporters no longer spoke of the savage billionaire. They spoke of a father vindicated, a man cleared of crimes he never committed, a survivor who had endured the weight of lies and lived to stand taller. The rival's empire crumbled. His name dragged where it belonged, into the dirt. The mansion changed after that. Its walls felt lighter, its halls less haunted. The West Wing no longer groaned with secrecy. It rang with the laughter of a child free to run in daylight. And she, once a desperate servant, found herself at the center of a family she had never dared to dream of. She found safety in the arms of the man she had once feared. She found stability in a house that had once felt like a cage. She found love, not just in him, but in the small hand that curled into hers as if it had always belonged there. Her story closed not with riches, but with something richer, belonging. The job no one wanted gave her everything she never thought she deserved: family, love, and the best days of her life. And now, dear listener, let the question rest on your heart. Would you have taken the job? Would you have stepped through those iron gates, into the shadows, into the unknown? Comment below, because your story might start the same way.